open conversations, building that trust, having, encouraging, and obviously some people are better than others about it, but, opening up and having those honest conversations, particularly when they can feel uncomfortable. I think being big advocates for mental wellbeing and bringing that into, as part of leadership practices. It's not just something that's written in a policy. You have those regular check-ins, you actually asking, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm Sehaam Cyrene. Welcome to the Leaders Who Coach podcast. I teach leaders how to use coaching skills for influence, performance, and impact, giving you the confidence to have great conversations, even in the toughest situations. Check out coachlead.co for more about my Leaders Who Coach programs and more about coach leadership techniques here on the podcast. Today, my guest is Kate Lawson. She is the founder and director of Thrive Partnership and provides fractional people and culture leadership to startups and scale-ups. Our conversation today is built on her over 20 years experience across people and culture, HR operations, and executive support, building functions from the ground up, including as employee number 4 at insurtech scale-up Loadshaw, where she took the team from 4 people to over 80 across the UK, US, and Latin America. You'll hear in our conversation today Kate's passion for being fair, transparent, and fully human, and how she's always striving to put people at the heart of business success. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Sehaam. Delighted to be here.
Brilliant. I'm really looking forward to our chat today, Kate. And some of the topics we're going to get into are how to maintain psychological safety in teams when you're also holding them accountable, and how to take care of yourself when you're going through challenging people situations. But first, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your experience and passion for people?
Yeah, I suppose going way back, I actually originally trained as a chef. So wasn't even looking to be in the people and culture HR space. I suppose school was never an easy place for me to be. I'm dyslexic. So, back then it wasn't, the support wasn't quite there that I needed. But, the 2 things that I was actually any good at were cooking and secretarial studies. So I kind of knew that I was going to go one of 2 ways. Working in a restaurant kitchen was not for me. The pressure was just huge. And it wasn't for me. So I fell back on my secretarial studies, literally working from the bottom up, starting on reception. But all the way through my career, I've had an element of HR, from the HR admin, and then all the way up to, where I am now, sort of, and that, anything from the admin side up to, supporting with people strategy. So I've had a lot of variations over the years, but it's, and the world's changed, and it's just something that, I'm so passionate about, and looking after people, because I think there is, at the end of the day, if you look after your people, they will look after you, and this doesn't need to be difficult. But I think, going back to your point, I'm very much all about sort of fairness and transparency and having those conversations early.
Well, all businesses are people businesses, really, aren't they?
Well, I think if you don't have people, unless we're all employed by robots, and don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of tech, but there are people involved in organisations and they need looking after. So that's what my main aim is to do.
They certainly do. And your experience in this space, people, culture, HR, can you tell us a little bit more about maybe some of the roles that you've held?
Yeah, so like I was saying, even from, when I was in my early days, it was very much sort of around the admin side of it. But more recently, I suppose, in fact, it was really when COVID hit. I was on maternity leave, and I found it not difficult, but I kind of needed to use my brain. I was sort of in a position, I'd also been made redundant, and I wanted to, I suppose I did a bit of soul searching. I was like, what do I want to do? What does that next step look like for me? And I put because I've always had elements of the HR aspect within my roles through my career. I had the world was changing. We were all finding ourselves working from home. And actually that opened up a new sort of way of working, in the fact, particularly for a working mum, I needed to go back, needed to work, but really wanted to focus on one aspect. And I think over the years, I built my confidence up, and I wanted to go down, purely focus on the HR and the people and the culture, not just sort of be sort of jack of all trades and, wearing the multiple hats. So I put myself through my CIPD level 5 and got my diploma. But, during that time, I joined Loadshore and was able to then really build on those foundations and supporting the founding team, get those foundations in place to support them as they scale.
Brilliant. Wow. So yeah, lots of change. I think redundancies are very often that forced push, aren't they, to do something that maybe you've been thinking about for a while doing, right? I was talking to somebody else recently about that, the fact that it is that forced departure that you perhaps wouldn't choose to do yourself, but it does put you in this space of, okay, well, what now? And you do have to do that soul searching, don't you? You do have to have a good heart to heart with yourself about what are you most passionate about? What is most important to you? And where do you feel like you can give the most and most effectively, which is obviously for you, it's been people.
Yeah, 100%. And I think everyone deals with change differently. You kind of go through that bell curve of emotions, don't you? Where you sort of, just a complete roller coaster of everything from, could be anger to sadness, etc. But yeah, I think everything happens for a reason. You don't necessarily know what it is at the time, but it certainly has given me space to, certainly later in life, just sort of take a step back and, really think about what I wanted to do, being kind of forced into a situation to go and do something.
Yeah. And you talked about needing to use your brain also. I think that happens, doesn't it? It certainly happened to me, that appetite and need for stimulation that is what you're used to, that is about, building you and fulfilling you. Not to say that we don't want to be with our children, but we do need that kind of stimulation and range of stimulation.
100%. Yeah. It wasn't something that came naturally to me. I wanted the best of both. And I think it's, it's good certainly for my kids to see that, both me and my husband, we have to go out to work. Things aren't just handed on a plate. So to have both of us, gives them the grounding of what their future is likely to look like.
Yeah. Yeah. Work ethic. I strongly believe in that. And yeah, I worked all the way through my children. In fact, I had a business that I was building while I was having children. I don't recommend it. Very, very hard going. Some might say foolish, but that was just a massive drive in myself, which, of course, again, different conversation with somebody else, but you always feel that guilt, don't you? I was talking to one of my previous guests, and that guilt as a parent is always there. But there's value in showing your kids, the value of working and building that strong work ethic in them.
Yeah. And I think it's trying to get that balance, and hands up, I have definitely not found that balance yet, but and that is a work in progress. But yeah, it's parenthood is a juggle anyway. So when you add work into the mix, it's just one extra thing to kind of juggle there as well, isn't it? But
I think also that is the messiness of life too, right? Yeah. I think we strive for rituals or routines or things that help us feel in control, but that's not always the case. And it's the same in the work environment, the same when you are working, I imagine, working with scale-ups and startups. There's a real messiness to it, isn't it? You're trying to create order from messiness, but the messiness is vital to any organization growing, right? You kind of have to go through sometimes the pain of trying to scale, trying to hire the right people, get the right skill set for an environment that's very pressured, which is quite different to joining a long-standing, well-established organization.
Absolutely. And I think there is a lot of pressure. There is a lot of passion in the startup world. The founding team, I mean, the belief that they have is completely awe-inspiring. They've got their product. Determination is unreal, but that obviously brings pressure, and it not necessarily snowballs down, but it's very easy, I think, for everyone to get swept up in that, which is amazing because then everyone's got the same belief. But then you have the knock-on effect of everyone coping with this pressure, from a cultural standpoint. Do we have, processes in place that support that pressure? So I think that, those foundations, they do get a bit muddled early on because, founding teams are, juggling so many things, their product, their hiring, they're the jack of all trades. They're trying to do everything until they get to a spot where they can afford, whether it be, HR support or, making those first hires. And, things can be, messy or a bit scrappy or not perfect. And I suppose, that's what I'm trying to do now, having, been, had the privilege of working for a startup that was incredible. It has made me now want to go and help other startups and other scale-ups, really get their foundations in place without needing a full-time hire. So, yeah.
And I think that's an important thing for all scale-ups and startups is having the right level of support and intensity of that support for the stage that you're at, right? Mm-hmm. But I think the people side of it is something that can get left a little too late, right? And certain things, certain mistakes, certain costs, certain delays could be avoided by having even the lightest level of infrastructure in place. And I think that's what's so critical about what you do is being that resource to people and guiding them to do it so that when they are ready to go full throttle, if you like, they're in a strong place to do that from. They're not having to undo mistakes from that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, it doesn't mean, you have to have a load of rigor. That's not what that's not what any of it's about. But just having those light touches, knowing you're compliant. There's a lot of change coming up with the Employment Rights Act 2025 is going to, cause changes across the board that is just keeping up to date with some of those. I think in the world of, startup and scale up is that what worked at the start doesn't necessarily work 6-12 months down the line. So having the processes in place that are agile, everyone's open to, change and, I suppose not sticking with that status quo as well. Don't have to be doing something because everybody else is doing, or that's the way that it's always been done. Yeah, obviously there's certain things around legislation that you've got to be aware of risks, but, just because another startup's doing something one way doesn't mean that the next has to be doing it the same.
Yeah. From your experience, what would you say that the senior leadership team struggles with the most in terms of people and culture? What do you think is most challenging given the pressure that they're under?
I think probably time. From what I've seen is sometimes it's not necessarily seen as the most important thing. And I think, the culture side is, it's not necessarily about all the fluff. It's not about the team building, obviously, which is important. But it's having those sort of, the basics in place.
Time to give it the attention that it needs, right? Because they're moving so fast, having to make so many decisions feels, certainly my experience of observing and working with scale-ups is there's a lot of firefighting still that is happening. I hear leaders saying, I'm too involved in stuff, but I don't know how to extricate myself. I need to be more strategic, but I just don't have time for that. And so the default response to issues that come up is to try and, put the fires out as quickly as possible, which is, it feels, and obviously is, if it's a crisis situation, it's the right way You do just have to put the fire out and move on. But it's recognizing those moments, isn't it, where actually this is quite a short-term strategy. I'm not building resilience in my team to do the things I need them to do that then protects my time to be strategic or to give me the time to focus on where I can best deploy my skills, right, or my strengths in service of the business.
Yeah, no, I think, and this goes back to sort of having the foundations in place early. Certainly from a people and culture side. Once you've got the foundations in place, you've got your basic HR portal that is there that will scale as you scale. You've got the data that comes from that. You've got automations in place. You've got your basic, contract offer letter, the basic hiring plans, onboarding, right, starting from, the very start of the onboarding journey. That tends to take off a lot of the pressure because then everybody knows what that process is. It's set up and on the whole will kind of manage itself. But it's when you're kind of looking for the template or however that works and trying to get someone's first day all set up. That's, if there isn't that sort of process, I think that's when it can get messy and can become difficult. And then that's when perhaps unnecessary questions get asked or you're trying to get answers from people that, don't know. So having those foundations in place, I think is key.
And to your point earlier, at different stages of your growth, you need different strengths or protocols or processes in place, right? So when you're trying to scale fast and hire a lot of people in a short space of time, that process from, recruiting and so on through to onboarding and the first months of somebody are really crucial for that startup or scale up to get right.
And that's likely to become harder moving forward with, government bringing in unfair dismissal from, 6 months. 6 months isn't a long time for someone to be fully embedded in an organization. So having those processes in place is going to be key for any organization.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know scale ups who've got that really wrong and they've been, they didn't have stuff in place and they're having to deal with tribunals. It's costly if you get it wrong, but it's so critical to have some basic things in place appropriate to where you're at. And what I do find is that folks who are subject matter experts in things other than people and HR really struggle to understand how important this part is because it doesn't feel like it's a priority compared to everything else that they're trying to achieve, right? All their deliveries and so on. So yeah, really, really critical to have that basic understanding. And you do, like you become a company director, you then have responsibilities. And I think that's often not understood because you're so busy with growing the business or the excitement of all of that. Who wants to deal with, the hard reality that ultimately you're responsible as
That's
a company director?
And I think it's just being aware of what the risk is. Because if you're not aware, you can then take the, the commercial element of what you want to do and how you want to proceed. But it's when you get the nasty shock because you haven't been aware of that risk and you suddenly find yourself having, let someone go. And you do end up in a tribunal situation. That's when the shock comes. That takes up more time, more costs.
Very distracting. Very distracting. Yeah. So you helped Loadshaw go from 4 people to over 80 people. What was that like?
It was amazing. It was the most amazing journey. The founding team were incredible. And like we were saying earlier, it is fast paced. So it's trying to keep on top of everything. But, I was wearing multiple hats there, but we had the CEO and founder very focused on his people and culture. And, that just fed through the organization as well. So it was amazing to be working for an organization that really believed in that. But, through that journey, they obviously had nothing. There was nothing in place, as you would expect when there was only literally the founding team and then me coming in kind of going, oh, we should do this and we should do that. And, So we were able to slowly start, putting HRISs in, HR portals, and as the team grew, bringing in things like, performance management processes, development. Everyone sort of wants to know. You might be in a startup, but people genuinely still want to know what their career progression, looks like. So aligning things with, things like values and behaviors, so that everything was lived and breathed by the organization, and values and behaviors, for example, fed through into performance management, into development. But
Right.
yeah, so it was amazing. And that was across UK and US initially. The larger team were in the US across multiple different states. So that in itself was a brilliant learning experience with, getting used to the US law and the different state laws, and then, across South America and then later Europe.
Right.
So it was an amazing journey to have been on.
The variety, I mean, just even you've got so much there, haven't you? Not just the laws around recruitment and employees and so on, but you've also got culturally just a vast range of people. How was that? How did the company you help bring everyone together and build that sort of focus for the organization?
So I think the key around that was really around collaboration, understanding the differences in culture. One thing would have been when looking at sort of building up out the employee handbook, there was obviously nothing in place, and, getting that going, you kind of sort of naturally sort of think, well, we'll just have one handbook. We'll just have one employee handbook across the board. And actually that doesn't work, because our legislation is very different to the US. And just thinking of family friendly policies, for example, as a mother or a parent, you have 52 weeks off. So in the US, something like that's unheard of. So, very, very, very different in how our legislation works to theirs. So it was very much a case of, yes, we have our, I suppose, culture handbook of, this is what we believe in and these are our values, etc., across the board. But when it comes to the policy side of the handbook, it was very much, no, the US has to be separate from the UK. And actually, as you're communicating and as you're talking to founders and the founding team, executive team, it becomes understood. You can collaborate together. I think it's when the communication drops that's when it becomes difficult, because it's like, well, why do they get something and not us? That's not fair. And it's like, well, actually there's reasons behind it. You do want to be fair. You do want to try and give your employees the best benefits and enhancements that you can. But obviously if there isn't the uptake because it's not the norm, then it doesn't make sense. So it's kind of, communicating those, and actually becomes easier to manage when you're not just trying to deal with a one size fits all, because that's when it doesn't work.
Right. And in terms of benefits, there would be quite a lot of differences culturally. There may be some things that are more valued in some regions more than others, right? And may be appealing to a region, but, that's not how it works. That's not what's available or possible. And I think that's super critical, having someone really focused on that in the organization as you're scaling, who can pay attention to those sorts of details that can actually create challenges within the organization if they're not understood, if they're not explained, right? If, as you say, if communication drops off. Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I'd love you to share about is, how do you, obviously, team is growing fast, new members are joining all the time, there are challenges and deadlines that teams are working towards. How do you maintain psychological safety in your teams, in those teams, especially across those different regions if they're collaborating, right? How do you maintain psychological safety when you as a leader are also responsible for holding those teams or team members to account and holding them accountable for their performance? There's some tension in there, isn't there?
Yeah, and it naturally, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? And I think when I say it's difficult, you're naturally going to have difficult conversations, or there's difficult decisions that leadership teams will have to make, and whether that comes from the executive team or whether that's, as a line manager managing people, everybody should feel safe. And I don't think that that's not a difficult thing to bring into the workforce. I think having open conversations, building that trust, having, encouraging, and obviously some people are better than others about it, but, opening up and having those honest conversations, particularly when they can feel uncomfortable. I think being big advocates for mental wellbeing and bringing that into as part of leadership practices. It's not just something that's written in a policy. You have those regular check-ins. You actually asking, how are you doing? And I think having, just having those little things in place makes a huge difference. And, building that trust, knowing that if there is something that people want to go and speak about, none of us are perfect, and we all make mistakes. So it's having the confidence in that, feeling that there's a safe space to talk about it, because then it's not, well, why is Kate not performing, or why is there been a drop in her attendance or her performance? There's reasons for it. You can support your team through that. So I think creating a culture really where, and it's a simple one, where people feel safe just to speak up, and really turn up and be themselves.
And I think that's a shift, isn't it, in recent times, for leaders to start to appreciate that they're actually responsible for the whole. Like, if an employee or a team member comes in and they're just not in a good headspace, that we do well to carve out some time to check in with them, right? Make sure how they're doing, because ultimately, if they're if they've got a negative headspace or negative energy, they're not going to be able to contribute. But actually, there are many ways in which providing that psychological safety is the route to engagement of your employees, for team members to feel like they belong, and this is a space that actually feels good to them. And but it's interesting, I think, for leaders of scale ups, it depends on where they gained their experience. Where did they start out, and where did they pick up good or bad habits, right? In terms of leadership, what have they seen modeled for themselves? And now they're in this space where maybe they have had some leadership experience, but more often than not, what's brought them to building an enterprise has been their expertise in a certain topic, right? And their knowledge of their deep knowledge of something. And it's not necessarily people, right? It's not necessarily leadership.
Yeah. It needs to be led from the top down. It's important that, I think psychological safety is not a luxury, it's actually a soft skill, so which makes it essential. And line management in itself is not an easy job. I think most of us can probably hold our hands up and say we just sort of fell into managing people as part of our career progression and never really had any form of training or support, and you've kind of just muddled your way through. Line managers understand the importance of the check-ins, performance, communication, fairness, transparency. It just makes everything that little bit easier when you are feeling the pressure from, within your role to get a product release or whatever it might be. In the startup scale up environment, it is so fast paced that just, going back to that communication, that general check-in, and, being fair and transparent. If someone's not performed or something's gone wrong, be open about it, talk about it, discuss it. It then doesn't become such a taboo subject when you get to, I don't know, some performance review 6 months down the line, and it's like, well, why is that still being talked about? We've been there, done that. Let's close the door. So I think that's where, communication and regular check-ins, can come in and make all the difference.
Yeah.
And everybody obviously deals with these things differently. And so it's hard for line managers. So they need the support as well, which is where, from a people and culture or HR perspective, that can really help, so that they've got the sounding board and can go, I've got this, but not quite sure how to deal with it. And it's not just on their shoulders. again, reducing the risk.
And I hear that a lot, like having someone to go to and discuss these things with, I think is often overlooked as something that all leaders are needing in the organization, right? Because I've been in conversations with leaders and they're like, I don't have anywhere else to talk about this. I don't have anywhere else where I'm thinking through my approach or my strategy to my people. And the other common thing I hear is I don't really know how I'm supposed to grow my direct reports. I don't know what's expected of me. I have these meetings, but they end up being quite tactical about, the week ahead, rather than being about their growth. And something you said earlier was even individuals joining a startup or scale up, they still want to know what their career path is. They still they're hungry and adaptable to the fast pace of the organization, but they also need that growth as well. They want to see where they're going. They want opportunities and be exposed to different opportunities to grow what they can do. Yeah.
And I think it's also got to mean something as well. There's no point having a performance process or a career development if it doesn't actually go anywhere. So you can have all of these things in place, but if it doesn't either go anywhere or they don't interlink, it all becomes quite confusing. And then you're going to have someone that becomes disheartened and, becomes a bit of a vicious circle sometimes.
Right. Yeah. It's got to have a tangible, opportunity, impact, and so on, right? Both for the organization and the individual. Otherwise, it's like, well, we had a nice chat, but nothing ever happened. Nothing came of it.
Yeah. And then that's when you see performance drop.
Yeah. And those check-ins are about celebrating with people as well, right? It's acknowledging, where are you at? How's it going? What was your win this week? Because often you don't know as a manager or a leader what the wins have been for a team member, right? There's too many things, but to create that chance and that space, that psychological safety to be able to share both the wins and the things that are more challenging and just protect that time. And, leaders who I train in coaching skills can find that they do this in a really short space of time, right? 5-10 minutes check in actually can be all that is needed with certain individuals to unlock them, right? To help them move forward. And that has a direct impact on the business, the efficiency or productivity of your people,
100%.
Which is so critical. One of the areas, obviously, that's impacted in this is your own well-being as a leader, right? What have you seen, and how do you support leaders? What do you say to them in terms of protecting their own well-being when they're going through maybe some really challenging people situations or conversations? Obviously, you've been in quite pressured environments yourself, right? In terms of leading that function, the people and culture and HR operations and so on. And you will have come across some really challenging people situations, from whether that is an organization growing or perhaps having to let someone go. How do you look after yourself? How have you managed that in terms of navigating what is a very emotionally charged situation? How do you manage yourself?
It can be tough. I think there are some tricky situations, and I think every HR expert out there will be only too well aware of what those are and the pressure that can fall on our shoulders. So with that, I think community really matters, and having the network of people around you who actually understand, because when you're in a standalone role or you're going it alone, it's difficult. So I think having that sort of external community who understands the pressure is really important. It doesn't mean divulging the ins and outs of everything, but just to go, they get it, they understand, and you can bounce ideas off each other. So I think that's really important, and that's something more recently that I've discovered with building my network out. Something that I hadn't until probably after I just had my daughter about 6 years ago was the benefits behind physical well-being. Not just mental well-being, but physical well-being as well. And I threw myself into exercise. And so now I've kind of very much a love-hate relationship with it. I have to force myself to go for a run, but particularly when we've got the torrential rain that we've been having recently, but the difference that makes just to clear my head and just step away from everything makes a real difference to me. So I think that's something that has been key to me. So the community and being active, whether it's running, walking, and whatever that might look like, will help with my own well-being, sort of be able to de-stress. But having said that, I do have to be strict with myself. I do have to sort of remember to close the laptop, put the phone away, be present for my family, and hands up, that's something that I'm not necessarily the best at. And I think as a working parent is hard because you're forever juggling. So, doesn't necessarily kind of that 9 to 5 has long gone. So sort of boundaries seem to sort of blur sometimes. So yeah, I have to be strict with myself for, logging off, going for a run, and actually being me. So whether that's Kate as the person, Kate as the mum, or Kate as the wife, is actually being me and going, no, it can wait.
Right. It does. It takes discipline, doesn't it? It takes discipline. And I think we're always, some days we're better at it than others, right? And some days we feel like we need to be more reactive. And some days we do have to remember that maybe this is an opportunity for me to exercise that discipline and honor myself and look after myself to do that. And I like the fact that you brought in, it's not just your mental well-being, it's there's a physical element as well, right? Being physically active, we want those feel-good hormones to kick in. We need our bodies and brains to synchronize with, our circadian rhythms and all of that to help to ensure we have a good night's sleep. And those are just, especially as a parent, right? Those are very real pressures that we face every day. And I see that with leaders that I support who are founders of scale ups and so on. A lot of the conversation we come back to is how are we looking after ourselves? And for founders, there is often this guilt, especially if they have family or a partner, where there's a lot of sacrifices being made. And that takes an emotional toll as well, right? We have to, be mindful of that, again, to your point earlier, when you are at work, you need to be able to bring your whole self to work. And just because you're in work mode doesn't mean that you aren't thinking about or processing personal concerns or, guilt about not being there for, bath time or men and women, right? I think that's a real challenge to get right. It's a juggling act. And that's why I've come to a place of just saying life is kind of messy.
And I
right?
think that's the thing, is giving yourself the permission that you don't have to be perfect.
Correct.
You've got to be kind to yourself. And I know it's very easy to say that. It's a lot harder to do it. But I think we all need to just be kind to ourselves and just go, okay, we're going to make mistakes, but actually that's fine because we learn from our mistakes. I mean, you don't set out to make them, but naturally something's going to go wrong somewhere. And that's something I have to keep reminding myself of. It's like things happen, you can't be everywhere and anywhere all at once. So just give yourself a break, take a deep breath. And probably sometimes, it's a case of going, right, I just need to put my big girl pants on and get on with it and go, you know what, I can't do it. I can't, and just, because then once you go, I need to leave that, I need to park it. You kind of then, you've acknowledged that it needs doing, but you've also kind of gone, right, let's just breathe, separate it out and then refocus. And it actually kind of makes things that little bit easier.
Right. Well, we need to soothe. We do that all the time and it shows up in different ways for different people, right? And we need to self-regulate. So we need time away from whatever it is that is difficult, in order to allow for our functioning part of our brain to actually have a chance to kick in and look at something from a place of calm, and a place of logical thinking, of processing stuff, right? Being able to even strategize. We can't do that if we're feeling triggered or pressured or feeling stressed about it, right? So, and that's something that, we all face in leadership roles. And I think also, especially the space that you specialize in, startups and scale ups, that's happening all the time for leaders. Because of the size of the organization and how invested people are in it, you feel every bump in the road compared to being, head of a function in a larger organization. You don't feel, those challenges where 1 month you haven't made your revenue targets, right? You haven't hit your targets on that. And the pressures are very real. You have responsibility for people's salaries, careers, and so on, and you're very close to them. So we do have to take great care of ourselves, mentally and physically. Yeah, for sure.
And I think that goes back to, I suppose psychological safety and well-being go hand in hand. Because if you feel safe in the workplace, you've got the space to open up, reach out. And there might be different mechanisms, whether it be HR, whether it be line manager, whether it be the executive team, that there is different points where people can reach out to different people that they may feel comfortable with, but it's open. It's not, why are you going to talk to such and such? It's very much, that's the way. It's part of, every organization has a culture. What that culture looks like is how you build on it. But I think having that safe space that you're not going to be judged and being able to turn up as your authentic self is naturally going to help with your well-being as well, because there's nothing worse than, feeling, I can't say something at work because of I'm going to get, it's going to impact me negatively. Then, it kind of then has the negative effect on your well-being. That then probably goes back to, your home life, and that, is where the sort of the home and work very much interlink, as much as you kind of desperately want to try and separate them all sometimes.
Right. No, for sure. If we're stressed, we can't be generous, right? It's a very hard space to find yourself in. I've really enjoyed our conversation, Kate, but I do have one last question, which is, what would you, if you're able to share, one of your biggest growth moments as a leader?
I think probably sat here right now as founder and director of Thrive Partnership. I didn't expect to find myself here, and I was working, I loved my job. Sat here now having to reevaluate what my next move was going to be. I didn't think, it was quite a big thing for me to take that leap from corporate to consulting. I have learned so much on this journey. From setting up a business to going it alone and supporting others, startups, with, getting those right people foundations in place early, because of the experiences I've had through working with a startup, that I can see, a need for it, but it's not been something that's come easy. My biggest growth moment will be launching Thrive Partnership. So yeah, not only do I get to meet other founders that are on their journey, starting out their journey, need the those light touches, building my network. My network was not something, networking wasn't my thing. I've never needed to do it. It wasn't anything I'd considered. That was a huge, the learning that I've been on over the last 6 to 8 months has been incredible. I have developed as a person. I think I've come out of it, more confidently, and actually more driven. I've always had, drive, but I think it's different when you're a business owner. So yeah, in answer to your question, I think right now, sat here owning a business, really trying to drive it forward with a real passion for people, culture, and getting those HR foundations in place early, supporting other startups, scale-ups, and smaller side of the SME market, navigate their journeys as well. Yeah.
Why? It's a steep learning curve just stepping into that space. And I love your focus on, your own confidence and the things that you learn and the way that it pushes us out of our comfort zone. I talk to many leaders who have been comfortable in their journey thus far in an organization where they've grown up or developed or moved through the ranks, if you like, and haven't invested in their external networks. I think that's such a common thing. Where do you find the time to do that? Then understanding that that your relationships are so critical in the working world to your own happiness, to that support structure you talked about earlier as well. So yeah, wholeheartedly encourage you on that journey. We've all been on it and we're all still on it. Right? So, but it is deeply rewarding to be able to do the work that you do. And it's a privilege to be able to step into those organizations and make sure they've got a really strong people foundation and a strong cultural foundation, right? And that the leaders feel confident about moving and growing their organization. Yeah, amazing. Brilliant. Well, look, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today, Kate. It truly has been a very fully human conversation, which I think is rare and really lovely. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. Absolutely. And for details of how to reach Kate Lawson, you'll find those in the description. So do make a connection and reach out to her. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, please do give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who you feel would benefit from Kate's experience and services. And are you subscribed to the Leaders Who Coach podcast yet? If you're enjoying the podcast, please take a minute to let me know by subscribing, drop a message in the comments and so on. You know what to do. And if you've been intrigued today by our conversation, I want to share with you, I'm a big advocate of leaders using coaching skills every day in their conversations with their teams, their peers, and even their customers. So if you'd like to learn more about being a coach leader, you can start really simply by downloading the Leaders Who Coach app in the App Store or Google Play. And from there, you can take the free foundation section of Leaders Who Coach, where you discover your personal values and uncover your blind spots. Super important to know those things about ourselves. Time and again, leaders tell me that it's really grounding for them, especially when they're faced with those difficult decisions or are feeling uncertain. Going back to your values and knowing, right, I know what I need to do here, what I need to honor is really helpful. If you're ready to gain your Leaders Who Coach CPD certification, I recommend you check out the website first for offers that I might be running on the self-paced program. See you there or here on the Leaders Who Coach podcast next time.